This week on To the Contrary.
Up front, the firing of the first woman executive editor of the New York Times. Then, the GOP gender gap grows with Republican women not running for office. Behind the headlines, will there ever be a National Women's History Museum?
Hello, I'm Bonnie Erbe. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the media gender gap.
Was Jill Abramson fired as executive editor of the New York Times because she asked for equal pay? According to reports, the first ever female in that job was not compensated as well as the man she replaced, Bill Keller. She even reportedly earned less than one of her deputies. A Times spokesperson said her total benefits were, quote, directly comparable, end quote, to, though not the same as Keller's. Abramson's brusque style at times was well known, but this and other incidents across the world have raised suspicions again that journalism still has a woman problem. The first female editor-in-chief of Le Monde, one of the biggest French newspapers, quit after much criticism. Statistics show men still dominate most bylines, leadership positions, op-eds, and Sunday news programs.
So, Sam Bennett, does journalism still have a woman problem?
Absolutely. We all drink from the same sexist groundwater, media included.
Yes, I mean, I think that there's much improvement that can be made in the media. Considering that the media is so-called progressive, it seems that they're being a bit backwards on the women.
Bonnie, a profession with so many women at the bottom ought to have a lot more at the top, giving rather than receiving orders.
Yeah, I think that they do have a women problem, and until they become equal in status, we're always going to see this problem.
Well, first of all, do we believe that it was because of the pay equity issue? Do we have information that it was something else? And why, quite frankly, would they have been so stupid? Sulzberger has to be an idiot to have fired her over that.
Well, bottom line, the truth of the matter is, even before this incident, there was all kinds of coverage of her, calling her, quote-unquote, bitchy. And if she had been a man, he would have been decisive, right? So let's look at the language that trailed her leadership at the New York Times. So win, lose, or draw, we can't escape the fact that we describe women in sexist terms relative to men, and whether she was pushing to get an equal pay to her, was it her managing deputy underneath her? Yeah. I think the point of this is we need to have women in leadership, but we can't avoid or ignore the fact that the cultures are male-dominated, right? So it's going to take time for the cultures to come up with the reality. So she could very well have rubbed people the wrong way, but the truth of the matter is that in of itself was sexist.
And clearly it sounded like there was a personality conflict from the beginning with Sulzberger. They seem not to gel at all. What was interesting is that yesterday the deputy managing editor, Janet Elder, was called the senior female managing, partners of New York Times, and she basically reasserted that she tried to get feedback from them and said, no, she received comparable compensation. So she was you have these women in leadership that are defending Sulzberger and his decision as well. So it kind of makes it into a little more of a complicated issue than just her hiring a lawyer, which I think
there's more to it than that. And I'm certainly not here to say that women are perfect once they become executives. I mean, they're human, and some of them are better with dealing with people than others. But let's look at the paper. Papers are in trouble, but the New York Times rose at the bottom line under her leadership. Whether her style should have been tolerated in light of that, I think is a real question if the paper weren't doing as well. But I think the big mistake she made, and it's kind of below the radar, is instead of making the inquiry herself about this deputy, who may have made more, not this present deputy, but in her prior position, she had a lawyer make the inquiry. She should have done it herself. And since she's supposed to be so brazen.
Really? I mean, sometimes I think you kind of need an intermediary.
Well, this is a woman who looked like she is a real leader. And if she can't speak up for herself and find a good way to ask the question, I was just wondering, only wondering, how come I just happened to have found that out? I don't know why she couldn't have I think men would not have gone to a lawyer to get them to do it. Now, I don't think that's the reason it happened, but I did note that, and I think that rubbed Sulzberger just the wrong way.
And under Abramson, to agree with you, 8 Pulitzers that the Times received under her leadership.
In 3 years.
Right, and also the fact that they said their online readership has increased tremendously. You know, what I hope doesn't happen from this episode, which is obviously around the world being seen, not only here in the incidents in France, that it doesn't discourage young women. That's my concern, is that young women, we need to get more women in journalism. Someone finally, was the groundbreaker to get women in the locker room. And, no one ever thought that would happen. So what I do hope that comes out of this is that as women, that we, support, we don't know what's behind the scenes, but that we do encourage our young women to continue to pursue.
What about journalism generally? You, at the Women's Campaign Fund, you started the Name It, Change It.
Yeah. When I created that initiative, it was based on the unbelievable sexist coverage that came my way when I ran for U.S. Congress in 2008. I mean, it was wild. It was a wild, wild west, right? And we did a lot of work with Women's Media Center around that. And I think the most important thing of this incident is we as women, and thank you, Bonnie, for featuring this on your show, we need to stand up and protest. Change never happens unless it has to happen. And we need to make the New York Times be very uncomfortable with the choice
canceling subscriptions. Here's the problem. A friend of mine from Arkansas emailed me and said, I'm not reading the Times anymore.
Wow.
And I think it would have a huge impact. The problem is, where do you go?
Exactly.
The rest of American journalism is in such a sorry state.
I don't think we need to do that. I think the bottom line is, as long as we as leaders, and each one of the women here are leaders in their own areas of expertise, stand up and speak out in the arena of ideas. If the New York Times get their hand slapped enough, that's how change happens.
But it takes more than that. I mean, they're getting very bad negative coverage, but really it's these institutions, these organizations that within need to have, mentors for these women so that they're getting the training that they need, that they get the opportunities that they need in order to achieve the leadership positions.
She was not a lifelong Times person,
right. No.
Abramson. She came in from outside, and her style was well known.
It was well known when she was hired.
And by the way, I never met her. But after she got the Times job, we did make an inquiry about getting an interview with her, and we got back from an assistant a very nice no. But I saw no brusqueness there. Is my
well, Bonnie, but you asked
point.
A very important question when you said, "What about women in journalism?" Period. And here we're looking at the top in the paper of record of the world. But this profession, certainly beginning at the time that you became a journalist, in swarms has attracted women. Why has it been so difficult, given the fact that for, I would say, a couple of generations now, women have been in journalism doing tough work, winning prizes, and yet you don't find them at the top of the
you don't find 500.
Yeah, or look at law schools.
But I'm now, wait a minute, I'm making a much more important point than that. The number of women in the field is such that you would have expected them to rise through the ranks in the ordinary course.
With all due respect, Congresswoman, if we look at a number of different fields, let's look at law schools, right? Law schools are graduating more women now than men. The 16% that are partners has held steady for the past 40 years. If we look at professions like banking is overwhelmingly women, tellers and all that, same phenomenon.
People become tellers, do not become bank presidents.
And only 7% of the leadership of the banking industry is, I think it's the same phenomenon. In fact, media is ahead of the pack with 34% of the women in leadership. So all I'm saying here is this is a big problem. It's a cultural problem. It's going to take time. But as long as we all stand up and rabble-rouse about it, we help move it forward. Because no one makes change unless they have to.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Erbe. From female journalists to female Republicans.
Where are the Republican women? Despite GOP efforts to remediate the party's so-called woman problem, there's not one woman polling in the top 10 presidential candidates for the Republican nomination. When Mitt Romney recently listed his favorite presidential hopefuls for 2016, he named 5 men before adding, hopefully some women as well. When pressed, he pointed to New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez. The GOP lags behind the Democratic Party in recruiting female candidates for all levels of government. In the U.S. Senate, female Democrats outnumber their GOP counterparts by 4-1. One woman who wants to change that ratio is Republican Representative Shelley Moore Capito. She won the Republican primary for West Virginia's open Senate seat. Democratic Secretary of State Natalie Tennant won her party's primary, guaranteeing the state will send its first female senator to Washington.
So, Mercy, as a Republican, what is it about the party that is attracting fewer women? Is it just the party platform is not going to? I mean, the Democrats have the white and the female and minority vote, and Republicans are largely white males. Is it just that you're not going to be able to attract enough women to be at parity with the Democrats no matter what happens?
Absolutely not. I think we have plenty of incredibly talented women, a lot of them that are in the state legislature, city council, school boards, etc. Where we need a lot more of is to get them up the ranks, which is through training and recruitment, which I think there is definitely room for improvement in the GOP to do that. I mean, it starts even with the Republican National Committee and in making sure that these women have the resources. We saw in 2010 that they were saying it was a year of the woman, that more Republican women signed up to run, basically, and it was over 200 women that decided to run for the House seats and the Senate seats. This year, it's kind of quiet, which is really unnerving. We need to have those women getting the resources that they need to win these primaries. The problem is they're not even getting through the primary process. They're losing and not being able to get into the general.
I remember I covered every national convention from 1976 until about 2012. And 2008. I didn't go in 2012. And I have to say that when I used to cover early on the Republican conventions, they always had a strong contingent of almost exclusively female, very wealthy, very intelligent, very accomplished, pro-choice Republican women. That is gone. It was gone 15 years ago or
like
more.
In the Democratic Party, the pro-life, segment of it is gone.
Well, but
what's happening to the parties is that they're moving.
There's not an equivalency here, and there ought to be. I mean, when Ronald Reagan was president, you had about an equal number of women in both parties. You have diminished. These figures should be embarrassing to the Republican Party. And you talk about, rightly, going through the legislature, 3% of the Republican legislatures are women. That means if that's the way they've got to come, we can't look there. I think that the Republicans have tried to reach out to women, but they have not got they have a structural problem. They have not got the kind of party where people feel they can run, and particularly run as a woman. They know they will be faced with these women's issues. They don't have a comeback on these women's issues.
Your thoughts as, you tilled the field for many years.
Well, I believe very passionately that we need women on both sides of the aisle, irrespective of value set. Boom, period. There's some pundits that say the big yawning difference, and remember, the critical issue about this is it's an ever-growing chasm. That's the problem. Ooh. There's always been more Democratic women, marginally more, but now it's this yawning chasm, exponential growth in the number, in this difference. Some pundits say that the Democratic edge was gained when they changed their party operating system so that you always had to have, if you had a male chair of a county, for example, I was the chair of my Democratic Party, you had to have a female counterpart. And some attribute that one thing to this because you had these women in the pipeline that had served in leadership in a systemic, structured way. The other thing that I think is very important is we need to look at the outcome of the chasm. Even though more Democratic women were elected than ever before serving, there's always been a commensurate decrease in the number of Republican women serving. And what's the net outcome of that? More challenges to women's rights across the board than we've ever seen in our nation's history, period.
Reproductive rights, you mean?
All rights. If you want to talk about family leave, the whole 9 yards, it's all been embattled. Why? We don't have the critical woman's voice. So I would say all of us as women need to be encouraging every talented woman we know to run. Doesn't matter if she's Republican, doesn't matter what her value set is. We just need more women, period.
And speaking of women running, I have to use the last couple of minutes in this segment to ask you guys about the Karl Rove comment about Hillary Clinton and what impact it will have. You know, he wrote...
Do you want to take that or do you want me to?
No, you could have
it. You know, I respect Karl Rove greatly, but that was just a wrong statement. Period. I mean, it just gives ammunition to the other side. I mean, clearly, you just don't go and say that someone may have brain damage. I mean, that is just not a smart political statement to make. You know, Hillary Clinton, that is a very personal decision for her.
Was it sexist, though, do you believe?
You know, I think it's more, not sexist, rather more age-related, which
so
I think...
Ageist?
It was ageist.
Ageist,
and
absolutely.
Sexist, I think.
You know,
the reason I think it's sexist is because we've had men run for office with much more serious, debilitating conditions.
Ronald Reagan, anybody?
Well, I'm not sure he had.
But that was more at the end. That was at the end. But like FDR would have been a perfect example.
Yeah,
they would have.
Or McCain. You know,
that was a different era, though. I'm not excusing Karl Rove, believe me, but I'm just saying.
I was going to say
nothing was reported back then. You know.
That's what frustrates me sometimes about the party in general. I mean, sometimes, especially some of our men, they kind of speak with their foot in the mouth, and that's an issue. And that may be a turnoff to some women, too. I mean, I think if we get a better representation of more women and more men who are a little bit more understanding in their language and how they address things, you know, we might get more traction.
Well, quickly, does this show, and we're almost out of time in this segment, but does this show how petrified the Republicans are of Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't know if they're petrified of Hillary Clinton, but I think they're aware that there is this sort of woman problem within the party.
Absolutely.
The truth of the matter is, however, is both parties, but particularly the Republicans, but we all need to be in the business of recruiting women, asking them to run. That's the thing that's missing.
Could I say about petrified, to your question? This, the Republicans learned, and they have said it, that you get out early if you want to get in front of these popular Democratic candidates, and he did it. This was venal, but it was malice aforethought, and he thought, just get it out there. It doesn't matter.
It's true.
So I think he knew what he was doing. I think he's going to get back in the face and wish that he hadn't done it.
All right, we need to move on. Behind the headlines, a National Women's History Museum.
It's the Senate's turn to weigh in on whether to finally start work on one. Last week, the U.S. House once again approved bipartisan legislation to set up a commission to move the project ahead. A similar bill has failed multiple times in the Senate during the last decade. That despite efforts and large contributions by high-profile supporters such as museum spokesperson, Academy Award-winning actress Meryl Streep. But this year could be different. That's what Representatives Carolyn Maloney on the left and Marsha Blackburn on the right told me. The two women have come together to make the museum a reality.
There have been efforts since the late 90s to have a women's history museum, preferably on the Mall, certainly in Washington. Why is it taking so long?
Well, I think that building consensus takes a while, and having the opportunity for people to get to understand exactly what we're talking about doing.
Quite frankly, Bonnie, I was stunned when I couldn't find a museum in the United States. I couldn't find one internationally dedicated in a professional way to the achievements and contributions of women. Women were a big part of moving this country forward in so many ways, from Abigail Adams to Ludington, who rode even farther than Paul Revere to warn everyone about the British coming, but her story was never told. Let's tell these stories that are unfolding with Sally Ride, with Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman on the Supreme Court. These massive achievements of women and their stories are an important part of our history, and it should be told. And working together, we're going to make sure that this happens.
This bill passed, or a similar bill passed the House several years ago and was stopped in the Senate. Mm-hmm. Why is it going to go through this time?
The structure now with the not-for-profit, with all the funds being funds that are privately raised, that makes a difference. And so many of the male members are saying, oh my goodness, I didn't realize there was not any kind of museum that deals with the women's history. Our goal is to move forward this that will allow for discussion of where the museum would be placed.
Why did you two decide to come together in a bipartisan way?
I truly do believe that the best legislation is always bipartisan. Marsha is a friend. She also is a Republican and a conservative Republican, and she's worked incredibly hard in lining up support, answering questions, and being everywhere she needs to be to make this happen.
I'd like to ask both of you, there was $250 million of federal money that went into the African American Museum. Why was it so much easier to get that approved than to get it approved for women?
I think that what we are seeing is with the budget constraints that we have right now and the accrued federal debt, which is just out of control, what we need to do is focus on tending to the necessities of government, and it serves us well to say every penny is going to be raised privately, from the building, the structure, the curating, the exhibits, the endowment. Everything is going to be a private dollar.
Also, to your question, it seems always that things for women are harder. And there's some elements that want to keep women down and back and don't support it. Obviously, they are enemies to the museum or it would have been created by now. Mm-hmm. And as Ginger Rogers said, I had to do everything that Fred Astaire did, only in high heels, dancing backwards and being paid half as much as he was. So we knew better than to ask for money for the museum. And I firmly believe if we appealed to every school child, male and female, and every woman to contribute $1 or $5, we would raise the $5 million overnight.
Tell me, if you don't mind, recite the statistics that you had about the number of women's statues and those sort of things.
In the Capitol, there are 215 statues, but only 9 are of women. Of the 2,400 historical monuments across this country, only 5% of women. We need this museum to inspire the next generation of male and female leaders. We have many museums for men, and rightfully so. They've made huge contributions to this country. But let's tell the full story.
So, I have to say, I'm thrilled that Congress appropriated the money for an African American museum on the Mall. It's going to be a fabulous museum. It fully deserves to be there. Why can they not even get a bill passed, not for any money from Congress at all? What is going on here, and what's going to happen in the Senate?
Bonnie, I'm an original co-sponsor, and Carolyn and I on the Democratic side have not had problems with Republican women. We have had problems getting this through, and the abortion issue is what kept us from getting it through. We also,
because
I think,
they didn't like that there was going to be an exhibit about Margaret Sanger.
No,
right?
We didn't even know what the exhibits were going to be, and we don't know yet. But they figured that something might happen, and there was a member that got on the floor who spoke to that issue. But I think we made a mistake. The way we got the African American Museum through was not the way we tried to get the Women's Museum through. We not only tried to get, this was not my preference, but Carolyn wanted to get not only the museum but a place, and a particular place. Well, nobody can do that. You have to compete for the place. The way we got the African American Museum was that we set up a commission, and it took us 10 years to get Congress to do that. This time, we're setting up a commission. And that commission is going to have appointees from the majority and the minority, so there's no way in which it can be controversial. So this bill was not even about a museum. It was about whether there should be a museum, with a commission to make that determination. And of course, we think they will, but this was the way to go about it.
Well, you know, I think that I'm glad that there's a bipartisan commission in place right now. I think that being able to move forward on this museum is going to be helpful. At the end, you know, it's private dollars that's being raised, so they can decide what exhibits they're going to be putting in. You know, I think obviously for the social conservatives, if there is a balanced approach about talking about, you know, if you're going to bring in pro-life, an exhibit on pro-choice leaders or something like that, you do something on pro-life leaders. Try to balance it out. So again, there's a place for it.
But that's not the argument. The argument is, because I think there were always plans to balance it out, it was that Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma put a private hold. He wouldn't even go, he was outed, but he put a private hold on it because there was an online exhibit
on Margaret.
Who's
a racist.
Sanger.
Exactly. Who
Well, okay.
basically said that birth control
All right, but that's not. But
clean the race.
Come on, that's not what the problem was about, and we're out of time. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.